So hi everyone, I'm Océane. I'm the researcher who conducted one of the Italian studies. And for this presentation, I will mostly focus on specific aspects of children mobility. So I will focus on their trajectories after their arrival in Italy and how they go to different places and to other countries. And I will also focus on what happens to them while they are on the move, what happens of having access to care, protection, and also their experiences at EU internal borders. So first of all, I will briefly explain the context of my own study and where I conducted fieldwork. So as you can see on this map, so I went to Italy in 3 different places. First in Palermo to encounter unaccompanied minors who arrived from Libya by boat. So Palermo was a place for arrival for those minors, and I conducted research in officer reception centers there. Later, fieldwork in the city of Rome, and the objective was to meet with minors who were either settled in the city or minors who were on the move already in and finally, as a recruitment place, I went to the border city of Ventimiglia. Fieldwork took place between October 2017 until March 2018, and at the time it was one of the most accessible place to try to cross the border irregularly for migrants on the move in Europe. So altogether, I encountered 39 minors, and you can see how where those minors were located in the cities, the number that I was recruited per city. And based on this fieldwork, I collected different type of data, like interviews, files, interviews, questionnaires, but also social media, because after the first encounter, kept in touch, as explained by my colleagues. We try to still be connected with minors despite the distance and despite their mobility. So we managed to stay in touch through Facebook, WhatsApp, but also through phone calls and pictures that were shared. And we also conducted participant observation in each of the settings and collected field notes, but also pictures, graffitis, documents that were provided at the border. Also the graffitis that we found in the migrant setting. So on this picture, you can see the graffiti on a tent that I took in the informal camp of Ventimiglia. So based on this first of participants, I encountered 39 respondents for the first interview, and for the second interview, I managed to encounter again 23 of my participants in 7 different countries. And for the third interview, I managed to encounter 14 respondents, 11 locations, and in 5 different countries. So they were quite mobile, and the majority of them actually did not stay. So this is a bit a schema of how we proceeded with the follow-up process. So the first meeting, then staying in touch together, collecting also information, and then meeting again with the participants wherever they would go. And so this gives us some information about what happens to unaccompanied minors after they enter in Italy. That was a very important aspect in my research, and I wanted to actually document the trajectories, but also to understand how minors actually do take the decision to settle. So basically to stay in Italy, to enter centers, to apply for asylum, or to remain on the move, which means to disappear at some point, to appear somewhere else a few months or a few weeks later. So I also wanted to understand what happens at that time, what are the events that can disrupt the trajectories while they are being en route. So for this, to answer those questions, I relied on my sample. So basically the longitudinal study that allowed me to trace and to document the trajectories, to understand through the interviews what were the factors or the elements that actually help minors to take the decision to stay or to move again. And so this is a brief description of my sample. So the minors that I met were from very different countries. Some were from West African countries, others were from Tunisia, Somalia, and Eritrea. They were also aged between 14 and 17 and a half. So we can see that mostly adolescent migrants who were on the move. And for that, I also analyze the trajectories and rely on the interviews. So based on that, I try now to explain the three main trajectories that I could identify through my sample. So the first trajectory is the trajectory of minors who decided to settle upon arrival in Italy. So they would basically, I'll try to show you on the screen. So this is this first trajectory, the settlement in Italy. So they would basically decide to surrender their mobility. So most of them arrived without documents in Italy. And so they are basically undocumented as such, but they decided to stop being mobile and to enter in reception centers, official infrastructure, to apply for asylum or to apply for child protection in Italy. So so in that sense, they decided to try to engage with the local community, the local society, and they engage in a different type of mobility, which I call urban mobility, where they will develop support networks with local NGOs, with local communities, with peer networks, which also make a link with Malta's study on how local and informal mobility is important for unaccompanied minors inclusion. But also through their engagement with official proceedings and official structures, they decide to take time to actually develop certain skills, certain abilities, such as, first of all, having a residence permit. So most of them were aware that it was a very long process, which also makes a link with Marina's study on the limbo situation and the long waiting periods. But they were also committed to engage in education, to acquire skills such as obtaining a driving license, diploma, and so on. So they were really trying to develop this social mobility, develop those skills that will help them to find their way in Italy on the long term. That was a plan that they had because they really wanted to stop being mobile and being able then to engage in life as adolescents and future adults in Europe. So they would then decide to register in minor center. They would really go through the process, through the different stage, and through the care system in the Italian cities. That's the first trajectory. So we can say a trajectory that means that they stop being mobile and they develop different skills. There is the second trajectory that I analyzed. This is the trajectory of minors who decided to remain on the move. So this is the trajectory of mobility that is in transit migration. And for this, the mobility is used actually to not wasting time. So there is also this component of time that is very important in an unaccompanied minor trajectory, because as adolescent migrants, time is counted for them to have access to care as minors, to have access to specific protection. And we know, and it has been shown by Marina's and Malta's study, that once they turn adult, the type of support they receive might be reduced and they might not have all the support they need. So they also feel pressured by the time when they are on the move. And the trajectories that they develop is also a way to cope with the time that is passing. And for this group, who for most of them wanted to go into another country, so they arrived in Italy, many of them to reach the UK or the Netherlands or Germany, or even Norway, and they decided that the best way for them to make sure that they would reach that destination and maybe some family members settled them was to keep going on the move without being documented. So for that reason, they mostly relied on cross-border and intrastate mobilities. So we say that they will not go through family unification processes, they will not apply for asylum, they will try to avoid as much as possible registration as minors in centers, and they would just rely on their own resources and their own networks to make it to their desired country. So for that, they will also find support resources along their way. And then we can also connect with Malta's study on Belgium. They will connect with humanitarian services and NGOs and grassroots organizations in the transit cities that they will go through. And they will also develop mobility in urban hubs. So sorry, it's not really, I'm just going into the different components. So the mobility in urban hubs, it means that, for example, instead of using mobility to integrate themselves, they will just find the basic resources and the material needs that they need to continue their journey. So basically transit shelter, clothes, food, but also looking for the bus and the train connections, making sure that they have the material resources needed to keep further their journey. Also looking for money and aspects like that. So this is this trajectory of minors who are on the move. They will be especially vulnerable because they are often not, they are quite reluctant to claim their rights as minors, and they might also not be recognized as minors when they're identified. So they are also very likely to be victims of abuse and violence through their journeys, even in Europe. They also, for example, engage in irregular border crossings and might face border violence during those attempts. And finally, there is the third trajectory of minors on the move. So this is what I call chaotic trajectories, because it's a kind of trajectories of minors who, at some point of their trajectory, tried to be settled. So they to get included in the local society, for example, in Italy, but also in other places, in other countries such as France. But at some point, they encountered critical events. So they had to use mobility again to find another place to settle and find let's say the support or the aspects that they needed to plan their future and to settle in good situations. So I would say that this trajectory of minors is in between the two first ones. There is this attempt to settle, but then some aspects actually hijack their plans, and then they find themselves in this involuntary mobility. And that's why also we have minors who might orbit for months, sometimes years, in Europe, not being able to settle properly. And so I will just continue the slide. So I try to understand what were the elements, the factors that were weighing in the decision to settle or to move further. And then I understand through the narrative, through the follow-up with the minors, that we had aspects that we could find in the three trajectories. So family and friends could play an important role in terms of choosing where to settle, but also being able to settle. Sometimes the family can also not support the minors, and then would create further mobility. Of course, the destination, if someone wants to settle in Norway and arrive from Italy, of course, the journey has to be longer. It's not finished yet, but also quality of care played an important role. And we've seen it also with Belgium and Greece. Quality of care and support is very important for minors. They are different from adults, and they need people to make them feel noticed, welcome, supported, and trust them. So those aspects were very important also in the narrative minors that I followed, especially lengthy processes in being able to be recognized as minors, but also being able to have a refugee status or being able to meet with family members also played an important role in the trajectory. Although in some cases, some participants were aware of the lengthy processes, but decided anyway to go through it because they felt that they have a big chance to obtain a secured legal status. And finally, not having a status also played an important role. So I also tried to identify what were the factors that were more likely to lead to mobility. So for example, family and friends in another location would lead to mobility. Later on, poor care support and long waiting periods would lead to mobility. And finally, it was 100% of the case, denial of protected status would lead to mobility. So here again, we see the importance of providing legal status for unaccompanied minors in order to help them to settle. So in this graph, I try to show also how this is not a single event in the trajectories, but it happens at several places, several time points, and that's why also we have such long trajectories before being able to settle. In another example, we also see that the third trajectory, the third one here, like this young person was trying to settle, but finally, after the lengthy process, was denied status and turned 18 to move again because he couldn't stay in the country where he arrived. And so that also shows the time length, the time period. Most minors were also mobile within the first 12 months of their journey after entry in Italy. And then they had somehow to find a place and stick with it, which also shows that the care that they could not waste, they could save a lot of time, useful time, if you would be given qualitative care from the beginning, from arrival. Now I want to delve more into what happens during these mobilities in Europe, and especially at the borders. So the participants mentioned a lot of forms of deterrent policies and forms of violence. So In the border city of Ventimiglia, for instance, they mentioned police sweeps and deportation of undocumented migrants to Sicily, but also pushbacks from the French border guards, but also police violence in Calais, and some detention also was mentioned in Bruges, which shows also that violence occurs at different places in Europe, and not only upon arrival or not in Libya. But there is also this feeling of conditional and controlled care for minors on the move, not having access to transit shelter without official registration, having to give fingerprints upon arrival, and also how care is provided but under control for transit migrants is also an important aspect. Minors also had very strong emotional reactions to those border practices. For instance, they had strong feelings of unsafety, confusion about their rights and their status as minors. They also feared deportation or being stuck at the border. For example, this girl says that she tried to cross the border, but every time she's pushed back by the police, and she wants to be alone. She's very stressed and confused, and she's just facing the failed attempts of crossing through the train. There is also this uncertainty about the outcome of their journeys, which creates further anxiety, but also this feeling of conflicting feelings of abandonment from institutions, and this feeling of responsibility for family members back home. Minors also felt that they had to perform adult roles, they had to be strong to be able to cross the border and reach the destination, and at the same time worry for their family. So they were saying that they think that they create worry for their family on Facebook. Those people are worried about their situation, and they don't want to make them worry even more. So we see how Malte was saying, minors, when they arrive in Belgium, they feel that they have to be responsible for themselves, but it's also through this journey process that it happens. And finally, as recommendations, just focusing on minors on the move, I would just think about first improving material and support provided to first reception facilities and emergency centers for minors, provide unconditional access to transit shelters for unaccompanied minors on the move, and conditional access to medical care for undocumented migrants on the move, and also ensure safe, fair, and timely relocation procedures promoting the child's best interests. And finally, ensuring the rights of unaccompanied minors, regardless of their residence status, while being on the move in Europe, and their effective protection from border and state violence. Sorry for the pace, and thank you so much for your attention.